All right, everyone, now we have to talk about the travel ban. Now, of course, this is being labeled a Muslim ban by people who don't like Trump, but they've been doing that for a while. If you actually look at the nations from which travel is being banned, some of them are not Muslim nations. In fact, yeah, there are a lot of Islamic people in Venezuela. I don't think so. You've got to understand that this mischaracterization overlooks one thing, and this takes advantage of the ignorance of the average neoliberal on, I think, geography and culture. There are Christians, Jews, pagans, atheists, and all sorts of other people within these nations, and there are plenty of nations that aren't on the travel ban list that are majority Islamic, I think Turkey and Saudi Arabia notably. Well, then there you go. It's not a Muslim ban, and the Supreme Court agreed. And they were talking about Merrick Garland. You remember Obama wanted to appoint Garland, center-left judge, to replace Scalia, and the Republicans said no. We're not going to let you do that. Scalia's, the conservative bulwark of the court. You want to stack the court with someone who looks more like a Ginsburg. It's not going to happen. Traditionally speaking, towards the end of the second term there, you do wait until the subsequent administration to fill that slot. But the thing is, things have become so hyper-partisan, people think that goes out the window and that they need to stack the Supreme Court. It looks like, by the way, there's a damn good chance that if Trump's reelected, he gets at least 2, possibly 3 more justices. It'll be the Trump court for a couple decades thereafter. They're screaming about it because Gorsuch, basically flips it into a 5-4 decision. You know that Garland would have voted the other way. He would have said, well, the travel ban, it's in bad faith or something. He would have used some weird legal definition. But here's the thing. The travel ban is blatantly constitutional. It should have been a 9-0 decision, in all honesty. It should have been 9-0 because it's so self-evident that it was constitutional for him to impose this ban. It's temporary. It doesn't mention religion, and the majority decision mentions that. It doesn't say anything about, you can't come to the country because this country is majority Islamic. It's talking specifically about situational political things like unrest, civil war, violence, chaos, and groups of terrorists, militants, movements that are deeply anti-Western or which don't like the United States. Why then would you want to take large numbers of people from those countries when you are then at greater risk? The president's job is to protect Americans. His job's not to protect asylum seekers in other countries. That's a charitable act that the United States and other nations do, but it's not the prime responsibility of the U.S. government to represent anyone but U.S. citizens and lawful residents. Here's the thing. I said that it would be upheld. If the Supreme Court handed down a decision at all, essentially they would find, yeah, the president has the right to do this because it's been done before. Jimmy Carter issued such a ban with regards to the Iranians years ago during, I believe, the hostage crisis then. Other presidents have done the same. I believe Obama, if I remember correctly, temporarily banned travel from several nations for short periods, and it's a temporary ban. It's not like, hey, for the rest of time, the United States will not take refugees or asylum applicants, and we won't allow tourism from, any of these countries. That's not what it's about. It's a temporary measure to develop a better vetting process. The thing is, now he can go forward and hopefully develop that actual better vetting process. It makes sense. It's an issue of national security. It's one of the few things that the president explicitly has authority to do within his executive capacity because of the nature of international travel being as it is, a national security issue primarily. It's primarily an issue of, hey, do we have a method in place to make sure that people who are coming over and mingling and potentially they're seeking residency or they want to be a tourist, do we know for sure that they're not part of some terror network and that they don't have a warehouse full of explosives somewhere in downtown Manhattan? How do you know if you don't have a proper vetting process? Other countries attempt to vet things, and other countries, by the way, frequently close their borders in part or in whole during crisis. You think of the Ebola crisis. A lot of African nations during that crisis slammed their borders shut, limited air travel, especially to afflicted nations. Most of them shut them out entirely. They put soldiers on their border because it's a crisis. It's not a permanent thing. It's not xenophobic. It has nothing to do with, we hate these Rwandans, so we're going to close our border to them because we might get infected. No, it's a crisis. That's just the way that it is. We have right now a world that's in crisis partially. It's been caused by open borders aficionados within Western Europe. The other component is by warmongers within DC, especially, and especially with France as well, I would say. The Libyan crisis. When you've got tens of thousands of militants and you've got people being enslaved and the collapse of a near first world economy. Why? Because of U.S. warmongering a la Hillary Clinton. Oddly enough, no one called her racist for destroying that nation, despite the fact that it's in Africa. I found that very funny. And Hillary Clinton is the one that's the actual bigot. Trump has not prefaced this on Islam at all. Somebody was pointing out, when I pointed this out on Twitter, they're like, well, don't you think that it's just Trump's way of getting as close as he can to a Muslim ban? I'm like, hell no. There are plenty of Christians and Jews in all of those countries for the most part. And he left out a few conspicuous nations with large numbers of people. Turkey and Saudi Arabia are quite populated and they are predominantly Islamic. Well, those people can come in from there. You can be a Saudi Arabian and come be a tourist in the U.S., but it's not on the list. Well, I thought he hated Muslims or something. It doesn't make any sense. The way in which people have sort of this weird roundabout mentality of trying to figure out, by twisting themselves into knots, trying to figure out how they can blame Trump and call him a bigot. It's not bigotry because it has nothing to do with Islam. It has to do with places that are undergoing significant amounts of unrest. That's all it's been about, and it's one of Trump's primary jobs as the president of the United States. In fact, he'd be derelict in his duty if he didn't pull off a travel ban. Should have been imposed by Obama on some of these countries long, long ago. But it never happened because he doesn't want the political fallout. He's like, a few terrorist attacks, just get used to it. He's like Sadiq Khan. That was his mentality the whole time. So I'm glad about this decision, but then SCOTUS issued another decision that's more a little bit, I don't know about it, and that's with regards to the pregnancy centers. Those places that are basically like administered by churches or by religious groups, and they say we're pregnancy counseling, and really it's just trying to convince women not to get abortions. Well, in the state of California, they had a situation where they said, well, we're going to force them to have literature and explain that abortion is an option. And the Supreme Court said, no, that's again, in a 5-4 split decision, a close decision, it's unconstitutional. You can't compel them to do so because they're technically private. In a way, I can agree with that because it's like it is a private, it's not a government-administered entity. Who are you to force them to tell people anything? But then I thought about like consumer labeling laws, and I'm like, but, if someone's going in and they're representing themselves as counseling that's involved with pregnancy, wouldn't you think the person has a right to actually, if let's say there's no Planned Parenthood for 20 miles or something, or no abortion clinic or whatever, don't they have a right to be informed as a potential consumer in a strange way of medical services? Don't they have a right to be informed about that? And I thought to myself, I would think on medical decisions that are lifelong, it'd be more important than, hey, knowing that there's MSG in your canned peas. I know some vegans might not think so, but it is a little bit odd for me because I am fully pro-choice. So when I look at this, it's like, private business, consumer rights, and religious liberty on both ends, oddly enough. And I'm like, it's a little bit more confusing. On the travel ban, though, it's pretty cut and dry. The president has traditionally had the power to block temporarily people from limited countries for the right reasons. There's no indication that it was prefaced on bigotry. All of his opponents assume that, but they only assume that because they already assume that he's a bigot. So anything that he does, they'll try to find some way in which they can say it's racist, xenophobic, or something like that. That's about all. Peace out.